Hello? Can everyone see and hear me? See, I'm going to turn on some chat. Hi. Can you see and hear me? Okay. Are you ready to start? Okay. Well, good morning for me. Good afternoon for you. My name is Carrie, and I am meeting with you from a museum in the United States. In the state of the state of Wyoming, our city is Cody. And we are outside of this pretty amazing place called Yellowstone National Park. And I say it's a pretty amazing place. There's a lot of very interesting environments. There's a lot of interesting animals, and it's the world's first national park. And so Yellowstone is the first national park in the world, and it became that because of all of these interesting landscapes and animals. And there's a lot of really interesting geology here, and it became pretty famous too because of that. So we are not in the park. Our museum is about an hour's drive away from the park entrance. But here, as you can see behind me, we have this long hallway that's not very descriptive, but as I flip the camera around, you can see the entrance to our museum. And this is just one section. We actually have 5 museums in this one building here, and all of them have to do with the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So not just the park, but the cities, the towns, the other public lands and forests around the park as well. So we have our Natural History Museum that you and I are going to walk through today. We also have an art museum, a Native Peoples Museum, and then general Western history as well. So to get started, I'm going to show you what it looks like in and around Yellowstone and give you an idea of what our environment looks like. So I'm going to turn off my camera and try and share my screen here. Let's give this a try, and might take a second here. So start broadcast, and let's pull that up. Yeah, it's gonna take a second. See, there we go. And let's look at this. Sometimes where is it? There we go. I wanted to show you a map as well. So you should be seeing the map of the United States. And where we are is an area way up top corner of the state of Wyoming. So this will zoom in to where I'm at to give you an idea. And we will see the park square or rectangle. There's a boundary there. Our town is right outside. This is kind of what it looks like from above, but you'll see what we see on the surface here. Well, that's underground. Let's skip ahead of that. So what we see on the surface is caused by a volcano underground. We have one of the largest volcanoes in the world hidden underground here, and it causes the ground to be very warm in places. Any water that comes in contact, any mud that comes in contact gets superheated, boils, steams, the mud splashes and moves. We have hot springs and geysers. And these are some of the amazing geologic features here in Yellowstone, right in the center of the park. Now, the park itself and most of the ecosystem can be found in mountain habitat as well. So we're going to look at the mountains, and I'm going to turn off the screen share, but I wanted to show you how important this could be to the animals too. Look at all the snow we have here. In the winter, we have a lot of snow, and this is very important here in the middle, the caldera above that volcanic area for snow to melt away, for it to warm up enough that that snow will not stick or melt away quickly for animals like our bison. Now, this is only one of the habitats here in Yellowstone. As we zoom in again, you will notice that we see the same area, but not only are we going to see the rectangle there of the park boundary, we have this huge oval area which creates that big ecosystem with a lot of the shared environments. So we have this Rocky Mountain area with the Alpine, which is the very tops of our mountains from around 2,900 to 3,600 meters. And then we drop below that Alpine and enter our mountain forests. And then we will drop below that and enter our riparian zone or our mountain meadow where it's very wet. And then we also the final ecosystem here in this, or final environment here in this ecosystem is our desert or plains basin. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this and come back to you. And we are going to walk now through, let's get this. We are going to walk through the museum. That will stop for us. All right, there we go. We should be seeing me again. I'm going to go and flip the camera. So we're going to look at those same habitats again. And there we have that one mountain that would be surrounding all of those geological features. But we have a lot of mountains here in the Rockies. It's a huge mountain chain. We have many peaks. And the ecosystems on each peak that kind of can be broken down into four main environments. Here again is that alpine at the very top. As you drop below that 2,900 meters, we enter the mountain forest with the heavily treed area. When you keep going down the mountain, as it's not so steep anymore, you see a lot of green still, but instead of dark green of trees in our exhibit, we have a lighter green of lots of grasses and reeds and rushes growing along the wet areas. And then we also have at the very base of our mountains, which is still very high elevation, this right here, our plains basin or desert environment. So our museum, this particular portion, the natural history section, is set up to travel us through each of those environments from the top down. And we're going to take a look at some animals in each of those environments. So when we think about animals and what they need to survive, we think of four basic needs that animals have for surviving. Do either of you want to tell me what those four needs are? It's okay. When thinking about us, we have four basic needs that, oh, very good. Yes. Food is really important. The water that helps us be hydrated and be able to survive, and a place to live. We often think of that for people as shelter of some sort. But when we think of animals, you're absolutely right. The environment, the habitat they live in. And then the other thing is one we often don't think of, but oxygen. You know, we don't have to think about it because we breathe automatically. But oxygen is that important fourth one. So those are the four basic needs every animal has to meet, no matter what environment. Now, we are going to start here in this alpine. So we have exhibits throughout our museum to show this event and a few of the common animals, or maybe the animals we hope to see. So these are some bighorn sheep in a painting, but we do also have some examples of bighorn sheep and the skeleton of a bighorn sheep and our Rocky Mountain goats. Now, our sheep and goats are some of our larger animals that spend as much time as possible in this alpine environment. They are here through our spring, our summer, and early fall. But in the winter, we get a lot of snow. And even though these animals have physical adaptations, parts of their bodies that help them survive, they have a behavior of leaving the alpine environment. These animals are plant eaters, and because of all that snow, they can't find enough food in the winter. So they will migrate or move down the mountains, maybe as far as our desert environment. Now, if they could find enough food, like these scrubby bushes or plants growing in between the rocks, they would stay here year round. But unfortunately, all of that's covered in snow, oops, in the winter, and so they can't find the food. They make their way down the mountain. Now, their bodies, though, could stay here year round. This right here, the mountain goat, is covered in a lot of shaggy fur. That fur is a great physical adaptation, part of its body, for keeping it warm in the winter, of course. And just because they leave the alpine doesn't mean it's going to be that much warmer as you get lower. The alpine is super cold and snowy, but even down in our desert in the winter, we get quite a bit of snow and cold. So that fur is very important for warmth no matter what environment in the winter. But it's also very important in summer. Fur actually sheds a thin layer and protects our sheep just the same. We'll kind of swing over to the sheep again, even though its fur looks different. Very similar in type of fur, and that keeps them comfortable year round. Now they also both have hooves for feet. So if we get close, you can take a look at those hooves. And those hooves really are great for sticking. And let's go around to this one past that sign. You can really see in there that hoof. The hooves are really great for sticking or clinging to the rocks. They're very soft and spongy. So they have a good grip on those rocks up here on the cliff edges, and they can run around very easily without much difficulty. And same with the sheep here. Even though these are two different animals, they really share many of their adaptations. The sheep's hooves are very difficult to see because they're the same color of its fur, but they do have them. And the other interesting thing, if we look at the sheep skeleton here, we can take a look at the toes that are underneath those hooves. So you guys could take your fingers like this, move them around, and that's how the sheep can move and goat can move their toes. And they use those toes even beneath their hooves to grip. So they can grab a hold, I'm going to try to get that good angle there, of the edge of those rocks. So you can try that out. And that's the way they can move their toes even on those rocks, even beneath the hooves. So some great physical adaptations for this rocky mountaintop environment. And then, of course, this physical adaptation that gives them the protection and shows their strength. These horns that they get their name from. These are two male bighorn sheep. And males grow very large horns. But females, the girls also grow horns. They're just only grow to about right here. And those horns stay on their head their entire lives. They're made of keratin, like our fingernails or our hair, even their fur. So it's a very good absorbent material so that when they use those horns to defend themselves from predators, they often don't get hurt. Those horns are very flexible, very much absorbing of any damage, and really strong. They also use their horns another way. What does it look like these two might be doing? If these were out in the wild, what do you think these two sheep would do? Yes, absolutely. Very well stated as well. They're fighting over for control of the territory. So the males fight each year in our autumn. And they fight to see who's going to be in control, who's going to be in charge of a territory, of a herd, that group of sheep that they live with. And they're able to do this year after year without really getting injured. Because of those horns, even the smaller male, which gets hit very hard and knocked over sometimes, doesn't usually get injured. Those horns are such great protection. So even if the smaller male loses one year, the following year it might come back and be able to fight to win that control, to be in charge, to show off for the girls and be the one who mates with the females each year. Those horns are a great part of that adaptation for fighting. They also have a special feature inside their skull. So when we look at the skull cut in half, we can see where the brain would sit. This is the cavity where the brain sits. In front of the brain, we have another cavity. This right here. That one is just filled with air, trapped between very thick layers of bone behind that horn where they're going to collide. This trapped air actually is another layer of protection. It kind of works like an airbag in a car. Now, of course, there's no bag comes out during that collision. It's permanently there. But this thick layer of bone, this thick layer of bone, this horn, and trapped air chamber really are great adaptations for that sheep fighting year after year and not being hurt during those collisions, during those protective fights, during those fights for control of that herd or that territory. All right. So that was a couple herbivores or plant eaters that are in the alpine that leave for the winter to find food. Our next alpine animal stays here in the winter. This one though is very small. We call these pika or pika. They are members of the rabbit family. And these animals, just like the sheep and goat, are plant eaters, herbivores that have to find food in the winter. But instead of traveling or migrating long distances, which could be dangerous for a little animal like this, lots of things want to eat them, these guys have a different adaptation for surviving the winter. They store food away. So a little pika like this will use a den, a home, that shelter space, the environment that they live in, that's their home, in between the rocks. And they stay out of the cold and snow, and they store their food there. So they will chew down a bunch of these plants before it gets too snowy and the plants get covered. They chew a bunch down, stack them at that entrance to their den, and then come winter time here, they will be able to stay in that den, come to the edge of that den where their food is kind of refrigerated or frozen like our refrigerators or freezers, and they will be able to eat that food all winter long. This is a great adaptation for them in the winter to use those dens to store their food, to keep protection from the cold and snow. And it's really great in the summer as well to keep them protected from the hot sun. They don't want their bodies to overheat. They're very sensitive to high temperatures. So having a place like this year round for protection from sun, protection from heat, protection from cold and snow, and of course protection from predators. Really great behavioral adaptation for our little pikas. That behavior of being able to store their food, create or find a den that keeps them safe is pretty important for their survival in general. All right, we're going to leave this alpine environment and we're going to start going into the forest where we have lots of trees. Now, of course, there's some trees throughout the rest of our environments. The alpine doesn't. We often call the alpine above tree line just because the soil stays pretty cool most of the year, at least cool enough that trees don't get enough nutrients. So we get scrubby bushes in the alpine. But here, once you drop below that high elevation, you start getting a lot of trees. You start seeing some big trees. We can't even see the tops of the ones that are in exhibit behind us. These are some really tall conifer trees. We also have deciduous trees. And here in the forest, we of course have a lot of animals. This next animal, you probably can figure out right away. What are we looking at now? It does look like a fox. It's a much larger version of a fox. These are They do look like huskies. In fact, they're very similar the way they look, aren't they? These are wolves. So we have wolves here in our forest, but wolves actually will travel through all the way down to the desert as well. You don't often see them in the alpine, but they do travel through the forest, down through the meadow, and in the desert. And you're absolutely right that they look like foxes, especially the little ones, and the larger ones look like very large huskies. And when we look at some skulls, here's a fox skull just to give you an idea. This is the size of a fox. It's kind of the size of a small dog, but it has this very similar skull shape to a wolf. We also have something called coyotes here. They're a little bit bigger than the fox, but much smaller than wolves. So this gives you an idea of the size of our canine family members. We have our fox, our coyote, and then here is the skull of a wolf to give you a size difference. Quite a big difference from some of our largest foxes right here to our wolf. So wolves have this great size, which is one of their physical adaptations, which makes them great hunters. So unlike those herbivores, those plant eaters up top we were looking at, we're now looking at carnivores and hunting animals. That size advantage that wolves have, being like a huge sized dog, really gives them some great strength and ability for hunting large animals. This one has a deer leg in its mouth. And wolves have great senses of smell to track that prey. They have great eyesight. Of course, they're very fast. They even have these really large feet, which is one of my favorite adaptations of the wolf. Those large feet have some skin between the toes or webbing, which does make them great swimmers. But what really it works best for is spreading out and keeping them from sinking in the snow. It's like specialized snowshoe type feet for running, chasing down food in the winter. Unlike the sheep and goat, unlike the pika, wolves actually continue to do the same thing year round. They continue to hunt. Those other animals have to have a different behavior to survive the winter, not wolves. They will continue to hunt through the winter to be able to survive. And wolves, they're pretty good at running things down on their own, but they don't have a great chance of survival as a lone or solitary wolf. But that's why wolves live in groups, family groups called packs. And this one we're looking at might be the alpha female, the female leader of the pack. And every pack has an alpha female and male. They're the ones that are in charge. They're the ones that are the best hunters. They help every other member of the pack know what to do. They're also the parents to the cute pups each year. So we have these cute little pups that do look like foxes. Here's another one of we like to assume it would be the alpha. So these all are working together for the survival of one another. And a pack wouldn't have just these 4 animals in it. There might be 3 or 4 more pups. There might be 4 or 5 more adults, cousins, aunts, uncles, relatives that all live together taking care of one another. And they're able to do that because wolves are great at communicating. Wolves can leave scent marks and trails for one another to follow and to mark territories. They can use their body language. Think about like a dog getting excited or happy, jumping up and down, wagging its tail. Wolves do all that kind of stuff too. Let you know if they're feeling happy, sad, scared, or whatever. And of course, they make sounds. What's the sound a wolf might make? Give me the sound. Yeah, awesome. They howl. It's real. That's great. Lots of howls, especially for long distances. That's one of the best things about wolves. Even though they're large animals, I've only seen them once or twice here up in the forest. Now, I've only lived here about 8 years, but in that time, I've traveled through Yellowstone, I don't know, 4 or 5 times every summer when it's easy to drive through. And I've seen wolves twice. But you hear wolves all the time. You can hear them calling to each other with those howls and yips and barks and getting excited. So oftentimes that's the only way we know they're there. All right, let's move to another predator, a carnivore here that also travels through most of the environments, can be found almost anywhere throughout the Yellowstone ecosystem, and in fact is one of our most common raptors in North America. So raptors are the birds like hawks, owls, eagles, and falcons. This one, you'll be able to guess right away what family it belongs to. What type of bird is this? Oh, good try. Yep, it's an owl. So they are in the same family. And the reason that I thought you might know is that owls all kind of have a similar type of face. When we get close there, you'll see that what's called a facial disc, that black feathers around the edge here. And owls have that to give them some great hearing. But like eagles and like hawks and like falcons, owls also all have really great eyesight. So owls have a little better eyesight in low light conditions than some of those other daytime birds. But this owl can see well during the day and will also hunt during the day if it needs to. The great eyesight is one of the most important adaptations for one of the raptor group members. They also all have these sharp hook top beaks for tearing apart food. So this owl might catch something like a mouse and swallow it whole without any trouble. But this owl also can catch large things as well. Some of our large birds, some large rabbits, and they're not going to swallow that whole. They have to use that beak as their tool, their adaptation for tearing it apart. And then the other thing all raptors have, if we can get in here close, you'll see those long, sharp claws, those talons that help them catch their food. So raptors have great eyesight, sharp hooked beaks, and talons for catching and killing their food. And that's what sets them apart from some of the other meat-eating birds. Of course, there are other meat-eating birds that aren't raptors. Things like pelicans, herons, egrets, penguins even. They're all meat eaters. They're eating fish, they're eating insects and reptiles, but they're not raptors because they don't use their feet. Raptors always use their feet in some way for catching their food. All right, so I moved down now into our mountain meadow, this really wet area where we're starting to get out of the steep mountain drops. So water is able to pool up. The rivers move a little more slowly. This next animal is one that does like to travel through all of the habitats, but is especially found often here in our mountain meadow. Here we have some grizzly or brown bears. And this is our largest type of bear. We do have another type of bear, a black bear. They look a little similar, but are in general smaller. But both of our bears are omnivores. So they eat both plants and animals. Up at the top, we met our herbivores. Then we stopped at some carnivores in the forest. And now we're here with the combination, that omnivore, both plants and animals. And they have some great physical adaptations for eating pretty much anything, kind of underneath this bear. But I want to show you its claws. Our grizzlies, brown bears have long, long claws. They're really great at digging in the soil, tearing apart tearing apart logs, rolling over rocks, finding some of their favorite foods. Because even though these guys are pretty big and can hunt, they often, especially in this ecosystem, look for berries, seeds, insects. They really love, especially the seeds that are found down in our conifer tree cones. So this is one of our pine trees, a white bark pine. And the cone in here, of course, would have some seeds. We often call those nuts, so pine nuts. That's one of this bear's favorite foods. And I'm going to kind of sneak over here a little bit. You're going to see some of the rocks that we see mostly in the alpine. But there's little moths on those rocks. And in our late summer here, the grizzly bears really eat a lot of those, sometimes as many as 40,000 moths a day. And that allows the grizzly bears to gain weight. Because they eat so many different things, they often have more trouble than our herbivores or our carnivores finding enough food in the winter. So bears, like these grizzlies and our black bears and some of our other omnivores, go to sleep for the winter. They hibernate. And being able to eat many different things, to pack on weight, to change their bodies, hibernating is a really cool, interesting adaptation that's a little physical and a little behavioral. Physical because they change their bodies, they slow their heart rates down, pack on fat. And behavioral because they search out places to sleep. They create places to sleep. They have to make sure that they're going to be safe. And then one last thing about our bears is I like to show the difference between kind of a normal sized black bear, our smaller bear, and that's pretty large still even. This is our smaller black bear. And most of our black bears are going to be about this size, maybe a little bit bigger. And same with our grizzlies. They could be a little bit bigger than this for the most part. But as you get further north in North America, they start getting larger and larger, and you get an idea of how big a grizzly or brown bear can actually get. So comparing that to our normal or average size black bear and grizzly and one of the largest grizzlies ever recorded, it's pretty amazing. All right, I'm going to slowly kind of move around here. And up there at the top, there's our eagle. It's a little harder to see because it's high up watching down. So that gives you an idea of comparing that eagle to that owl. And we're going to scoot over here to another animal that spends a lot of time in this area. In fact, unlike the grizzlies, these river otters that we're looking at really spend their entire lives in the mountain meadow. That's because our otters have great adaptations for being in and around water. So river otters are a carnivore. They eat a lot of fish. They'll eat reptiles, they'll eat insects, they'll eat amphibians. And they have these long, skinny bodies that help them swim really well. They have the ability with those long tails to move in and around rocks and logs, keeping their eyes on their food. And they have two layers of fur. So these two layers of fur, this outer layer that we see is coarse or rough, kind of like a waterproof jacket. River otters look wet when they come up out of the water, just like you or I would look wet coming in and out of the rain in a rain jacket. But that rain jacket for us keeps us dry underneath, and this outer layer for the otters keeps them dry underneath. So they have this outer waterproof coat with an undercoat that's very soft and warm. So even in the winter, as a carnivore, when they're diving down in those cold waters finding food to eat, they're comfortable. And of course, like other water animals, they have some webbed feet for swimming. They also have tiny ears with extra flaps inside their nose, and their eyes have a third eyelid, a nictitating membrane it's called. A lot of animals actually have this. Many of our birds, most of our birds have this, and many of our other water animals, many other animals in general have that third eyelid. But for the otters, it's an especially important adaptation. They can close that third eyelid and see through it. So they can track that prey. They can see where they're going. They can make it a little more easily to maneuver around while they're swimming through those rocks. I think that would be a fantastic adaptation. Actually, let's come back over here. I want to talk something else. I would love to have a third eyelid. The other interesting thing about our otters, and you might have noticed on our grizzly bears or even on our wolves, is that they have eyes facing forward. Carnivores like the otter, the wolf, omnivores like the grizzly bear, they are going to have eyes facing forward, like you and I, because we can eat both meat and plants. And that allows you to track prey. An herbivore, like those sheep or goats, or like this big moose here, does not have eyes right in the front, facing forward. So if this was a carnivore or an omnivore, his eyes would be right here, but they're not. The eyes are on the side of his head, which allows our moose to see all around its body to see if any predators might be coming. Because think about having his face in munching in plants all the time, chewing up these plants along the water's edge. If they had their eyes right in front, that's all they would see. And predators could sneak up on them. So having eyes on the side of the head is a very important adaptation for our herbivores. Now, this moose loves this wet environment because some of their favorite foods are wetland plants that grow. They like to browse or scrape their teeth and take off the shoots on these trees that grow right along the wet areas. And they have these big long legs to help them get into some of the deeper water that other animals can't get in easily. So our largest deer, the moose, loves this mountain meadow. And they have these really big hooves as well. And just like the sheep and goat, those hooves are great for climbing, helps them climb out of the muddy riverbanks. They actually spread out, kind of like the snowshoe feet on the wolf, to keep them from sinking in the mud, that really soft mud. But they also work great for climbing up out of those mud banks. And then last thing on our moose are those things growing on its head. Instead of calling them horns on the deer family members, we call them antlers. And That's for a couple reasons. They are a little different than the horns on the sheep and the goat. So horns are made of that keratin, the stuff like our fingernails. They're on their sheep's head their entire life. They're on both male and females. Well, that is not true with antlers. When we see antlers like this on a deer family member, we generally know it's a male. The only deer family member where females have antlers is the caribou or reindeer. So for our moose, for another deer that we're going to see down in this next environment, when we see the antlers, we know it's a male. And another difference, those antlers are made of bone. So it's just like bones growing in our body, but they're growing outside of the moose's head. And they're only on the males, and they fall off every year. So instead of staying on their heads growing larger throughout their lives, they drop or shed those antlers in the winter and then grow a new set that's that large or larger. So those are a few differences, giving the antlers a different name. Now they are used the same way as the sheep and goat. They'll fight over territories in the fall or autumn. They will use those to protect themselves from predators. Just a little bit different structure and who they're on. All right, we are in our final environment. This is our desert environment. It's quite a bit drier down here in general, but we do still get rain. We do still get snow, and it gets incredibly cold in our winter. It's pretty cold. Well, today's a warmer day. We're going to get cold in a couple days. This is another of our deer family members, a mule deer, and it has antlers, so we know it's a male. And then we have this plant right here called sagebrush that really is the number one plant throughout this entire environment. And it provides a lot of shelter and habitat and food for many animals. One of those is in this screen right now. She's just a little difficult to see because she blends in. What's the word we use when an animal blends in with its environment? Any ideas? Can't, it's camouflage, we usually say. So this one is easy to see maybe because I kind of zoomed in on her. I got really close. But thinking about that eagle or a hawk flying above, they may not notice those feathers. They really blend in with the branches of the sagebrush, especially the drier parts of the sagebrush. So this sage grouse bird is really well camouflaged. She blends in, she disappears. I'm going to scoot around to show you, that one's a female. I'm going to show you a male during mating season. Now the male blends in as much as possible too, especially during daylight. He'll hide out in those bushes and not be puffing out his chest. But when he's trying to find a mate, he dances around kind of in the open areas like this and puffs out his chest to show off for the girls. But even then, thinking about somebody flying above, they may not even notice those tail feathers. They really look like the branches of that sagebrush, helping these guys use a great physical adaptation, that camouflage, to disappear into their surroundings. All right, I'm going to show you one more deer just to give you an idea of another large deer here. And then I'm going to show you the fastest running animal in North America. So first, let's look at our second largest deer family member. This is our elk. They are almost as big as that moose we saw, but you can tell a difference in the type of antler structure. They have long, thin, almost like that mule deer antlers, but they're really large. And they love this desert environment as well. They're pretty good at climbing. They will climb up high to find food if they need to, higher on the mountain, but they really like these low environments, especially through the winter. And then our last animal is our fastest running animal in North America. This is a pronghorn. And pronghorns sometimes get a common name or a nickname of antelope because they kind of look like antelope, but they're only really distant cousins. Now, most scientists agree that this is, sorry, I'm losing my, there, strap. That most scientists agree that this might even be the second fastest running animal in the world. Of course, we all know the fastest running animal is what? Yeah, cheetah. Yeah. So that's the fastest running in the world. And their prey, the cheetah's prey, are pretty fast too. But when scientists have tested this out, they found that this pronghorn runs almost as fast as the cheetah. They run over 90 kilometers an hour, and they do that and outrun all of the predators we have here in North America. I'm going to show you a map of where the pronghorn can be found. So this is got a little bit of a glare, but this gives you an idea of the range of the pronghorn. And we, of course, do not have cheetahs in the wild here, though we used to. The cheetah, the American cheetah, is now extinct. It went extinct during the last big ice age extinction period, but is evidence of an American cheetah. There's fossils of those cheetahs, and there's fossils of those cheetahs nearby fossils of this pronghorn, which surprisingly, sorry, I'm trying to hold it up high and I can't hold it. Sorry about that drop. Which surprisingly has survived. And the pronghorn has survived as our fastest running animal by far here in North America. So our fastest predator would be the wolf, and they do run fast. They can run around 60 or so kilometers an hour, but the pronghorn can run 90. This animal adapted to outrun those cheetahs, a short-faced bear. There even at one time was an American lion. And even though these are plant eaters that don't have to chase food down, they do need to escape predators. And unless the wolf comes upon an injured or really old or really young pronghorn, the wolf's not going to catch them because the pronghorn can outrun them. There's also a lot of these guys around too. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the camera, and sorry about that drop there. I was trying to hold it up high enough. I'm going to go to a little bit quieter area where I can hear you just a little bit better. We've got some sounds on here in the museum, and see if you guys have any questions or if you have any interesting animals around where you live that I should know about, because I will have to say, I don't think I visited Egypt before, so I might not have heard of some of the really interesting animals you have near you. Do you have any questions? Any cool animals I should learn about? Good. Well, thank you for joining me today. It's so nice to join people from all over, and I really appreciate you wanting to come to our museum and see what it's like here. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye.